But I want to welcome everyone to our final session for the Visualizing Change, Resisting Violence Symposium, a symposium of the Gender-Based Violence Consortium. We are so honored to have our friends, colleagues, and colluders in this last session that will be about healing communities. So I want to welcome you all for the last session. I want to now invite our colleague, Erin, to introduce herself.
Hello, this has been such a wonderful event. I'm Erin, a licensed clinical social worker at the Women's Resource Center. We're so happy to be a part of this event. If anything comes up, any emotional issues, or just being able to connect, that's what I'm here for. So you can privately chat with me, and I will also put my email in the chat box. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin, for doing that. We just also want to remind people that we also have a bunch of resources available on our website. So you can visit our website. There's a ton of resources, or you can always connect with us. But we really want you to know that resources like Erin are available to you, whether you need it today, or if you're next week feeling things as you reflect on our wonderful events that we've had for the past 2 days. You can always connect with the resources available. So thank you, Erin, for being an important partner via the Women's Resource Center. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce the moderator, who is Diane Lish-Strain. She is a master's in education candidate in the Educational Leadership and Policy Department at the University of Utah. Diane earned her Bachelor of Arts in English Language and Literature from Cal Poly. She's a graduate assistant for the Gender-Based Violence Consortium, and I think that title does not sum up everything she does for the consortium. She does a ton and also co-directed the Utah Women's Narrative Project, which was a beautiful, beautiful performance narrative, people sharing stories that we launched our events yesterday with. Her graduate capstone project centers women of color's experience of sexual violence in college campuses through an intersectional lens. And so without further ado, I'd like to now invite Diane to take the microphone.
Great. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dr. Fukushima. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our final session of the GBVC's Symposium. My name is Diane, and I use she, her pronouns, and I will be moderating this panel titled Healing Communities. I'm going to begin by introducing our speakers, and then we will continue on with presentations. Presentations will last around 15 minutes, and for presenters, I will cue you whenever we're about to be done with time. And we will do Q&A at the end. And to ask a question, please send your question in the chat box, or if you prefer to ask your question verbally, raise your hand with the raise hand function, and I will call on you at the end. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce all 4 of our speakers, and then we will continue on with presentations. Our first presenter will be Amita Swadhin. Amita has been an educator, storyteller, and strategist working with grassroots, nonprofit, educational, and government organizations for over 20 years. In 2016, Amita founded Memoirs, a national storytelling and organizing project intervening in rape culture by uplifting the narratives, healing, and leadership of two-spirit, transgender, intersex, non-binary, and/or queer, Black, Indigenous, and of color survivors of child sexual abuse. Our next speaker will be Dr. Fuifuilupe Niumeitolu. Dr. Niumeitolu is a Tongan scholar, storyteller, and community organizer. She received her doctorate from the Comparative Ethnic Studies Department at the University of California, Berkeley in 2019, and is a 2021 UC President's Postdoctoral Fellow at the Department of Native American Studies at UC Davis. She is currently working on 2 manuscripts that examine the colonial legacies of normalizing heteropatriarchy and violence against women in the productions of Tongan culture, families, and in the formation of Tongan intimate relationalities. Our third speaker will be Caroline Lovell. Caroline is a healing artist, and in 2013 launched the Women's Wisdom Initiative, a nonprofit built on the premise that by channeling one's traumatic experience into creativity, survivors of trauma can begin to heal, share their resiliency with others, and become leaders in ending gender-based oppression. Their signature workshop is called Traveling Postcards, where survivors and their allies connect their voices of solidarity, to a global conversation of empowerment and gender equality. Her programs are created to serve survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, sex trafficking, and political sexual violence as communications of solidarity and compassion. And our final speaker will be Saundra Shanti. Saundra is a board-certified multi-faith chaplain and merges art and spirituality within an imaginative process that transforms art supplies and life experience into something therapeutic and meaningful. She has engaged hospital staff, patients, and survivors of domestic violence in art making to express themselves, explore their success or suffering, and move toward holistic well-being. Saundra is currently a chaplain at the U of U Hospital. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today, and we will go ahead and get started with Amita.
Thank you for that introduction, Diane, and hello, everyone. My name is pronounced Amita. I know it's not easy to see that as the spelling, but my name is a Sanskrit word. My parents are immigrants from India, so just want to bring my lineage into the space. And I am a second generation person, meaning I'm the first person in my lineage to be born in the United States. And that really informs a lot of my work in terms of figuring out my positionality here and figuring out what my commitment is in terms of liberation work. My family on my mother's side were freedom fighters against the British and Portuguese colonial empires in South Asia, but we're also from an upper caste lineage. So when I want to talk about anti-violence work, I talk about coming from a lineage of oppressors, but being oppressed from a gender perspective within that lineage. I first came into this work because of my lineage and the ancestral and intergenerational patterns of violence in Brahminical patriarchy. So you may already be familiar with the history of caste in the Indian subcontinent and the way that gender intersects with that system. But for those who may not be, I will just paint a very quick picture because I don't really know how to explain the work that I'm doing without bringing my own lineage into the room. So in Brahminical Hinduism, at least since 2,200 years ago, there was a codification of a cultural practice of patriarchy through something being written down, the English translation for which is the Code of Manu. And within the Code of Manu, it says that if you are female assigned at birth, then you are the property of your father upon birth, and that your father has the right to marry you off to whoever he deems, whichever man he deems that he would want to be connected to through marriage, and then you're the property of your husband. And should you outlive your husband, you are then the ward of your oldest son if you have a son. And so I think about that a lot because I think about the ancestral lineage of trauma in my bloodline, specifically the knowledge that I have from the women and girls or younger than me women in my lineage backwards and forwards, that all of us have been the victims and survivors of sexual violence and specifically rape, usually within our family or our own immediate community. And at the same time, because we are from an upper caste lineage, we're also from lineages of people who indentured indigenous people and Dalit people, so-called untouchable people in the bottom of the caste system hierarchy. And that caste violence happens today. Still, it exists very much today within the South Asian subcontinent and within insular parts of the diaspora around the world. And my work is not necessarily focused on the liberation specifically of people who are oppressed in the South Asian subcontinent. And that is because my grandmother fled that gendered violence as a PhD student using the resources or the gates that were open for her. She was a scholar in India of labor studies and sociology, and she got into a PhD program in Ohio and fled her abusive husband at the age of 35, coming here as a single mother with two daughters who were 10 and 11 years old. And so my family has been here for 50 years now. I was born and raised here. And I think a lot about the responsibility of those of us who perhaps have comparable stories, who made a choice to come to Turtle Island, the land that is popularly called the United States. What is our responsibility when our chance at freedom for our bloodlines comes by being a settler by choice in the homeland of Indigenous people here who have been oppressed structurally and culturally ever since Europeans came to these shores, and also the land in which kidnapped Africans were enslaved, and the legacy of both of those violences continues today. I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. My father was the person who raped me repeatedly through my childhood. I'm super open about that. And that violence, that form of violence, was in my life from the age of 4 through the age of 12. I also consider myself a survivor of state violence. There was mandated reporting against my will at the age of 13, and everybody who was an agent of the state who intervened in my family, from the social workers to the police officers to the prosecutors, were white people who were incredibly violent. And I didn't recognize it as violence at the time because they weren't necessarily beating me or screaming at me, but they did threaten to incarcerate my mother, who was also a victim of my father's violence. And their threat was because they saw her as having been complicit for the violence that happened to me. So all of those experiences very much inform the work that I do. I have been doing anti-violence work, particularly around intimate violence, which is a term that I use to describe all forms of child abuse, any form of adult to adult sexual violence, and adult to adult intimate partner violence as well. I think of that umbrella term as being intimate violence, the violence that happens in our homes, in our immediate families, and in our intimate communities. And of course, as I'm sure you all know, this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So for me, I think where I land today is being very, very clear that the state is not our friend. We're living in a time in which people who are not Black or Indigenous but live in the United States are starting to see evidence through social media and through direct organizing campaigns about how violent this police state that we live in really is. But for me, it's been a journey from the age of 13 of experiencing a wing of state violence in my own life to now actually leading a project, co-directing really a project that I founded 5 years ago called Memoirs. So I would briefly, with the rest of my time, like to explain to you what Memoirs is and why we're doing what we're doing. I will just read from our outline document because I think it's easier than trying to explain it otherwise. We are a national project. We are a storytelling and organizing project that intervenes in rape culture by uplifting the narratives, healing, and leadership of Black, Indigenous, and of color, two-spirit, transgender, non-binary, intersex, and queer survivors of childhood rape and sexual assault very specifically. And then the reason, these are some statistics around child sexual abuse that you may know. But we specifically uplift the leadership of gender nonconforming, meaning transgender, non-binary, two-spirit, or intersex Black and Indigenous people because of the history of Turtle Island. And we are living in a time in which we also, I hope it's obvious to everyone, 28 different states are currently debating bills that would criminalize healthcare for transgender youth and or ban transgender women from participating in sports. And just to bring that into the frame of gendered sexual violence, this is a long arc of violence that transgender and gender nonconforming people face in this country from birth, usually through the end of their lives. While the US Centers for Disease Control has demonstrated that 20% of all adults, 1 in 4 female assigned and 1 in 6 male assigned at birth people experience child sexual abuse by the age of 18. There's actually a study from 10 years ago that the American Academy of Pediatrics released that shows that gender nonconformity is a risk factor for sexual violence. And that study actually said that children who are assigned male at birth are up to 6 times likelier of being raped or sexually assaulted than other children if they are gender nonconforming. And I'm going to pause there because that really is the crux of what Memoirs is built around. We're living in a time as well as there's been a shift in consciousness around white supremacy and the everyday violence of the police state. There has also been, in the last 5 years, a shift in consciousness around rape culture. But right now, the dialogue does not reflect this statistical reality, right? What this statistic is saying to me is that transgender women and effeminate men or boys are more at risk when we talk about gendered violence than any other gender of people. And that is actually an experience we have not yet made enough room for in our anti-sexual violence movements. And so in Memoirs, we have built a base using the model of storytelling. I traveled the country from 2016 to 2018, interviewing 60 different survivors who were queer or trans people of color and who had survived child sexual abuse across 15 different states. And the findings were pretty telling. So I'm going to show you some data from the findings here. Our storytellers, this is what we call our audio archive now from those 60 stories. Just to give you a shot of their demographics, 42% of these 60 people are Black, 37% are Latinx, 10% Indigenous, and 31% Asian or Pacific Islander. 9% were actually raped or sexually assaulted by a cisgender woman. 70% of our storytellers are transgender, non-binary, or intersex. Survivors who grew up to identify as transgender women had multiple perpetrators across a broader span of time into adulthood at much higher rates than other survivors, because of course we do have cisgender women who are queer people of color in our archive as well. And then as children, many of our storytellers were sexually assaulted in mental health hospitals by the police and or in foster care, especially those who were transgender, gender nonconforming, and or wards of the state, which to me reveals a failure of our current social safety net to protect survivors at the intersections of oppression. And 100% of the people in our archive shared their personal vision for how humanity can end child sexual abuse. I want to note that very few named police or prisons as a solution, because of course they are part of populations that are still to this day in adulthood brutalized by the police. And so when we talk about healing and we talk about what does healing mean, if we are an abolitionist project, which we are, our members, we have a base of 500 members across the country now who are all queer or trans people of color who are survivors of child sexual abuse, and a supporter list of about 5,500 people beyond that. We asked everyone in the interviews if you lived in a dimension in which capitalism did not exist. And the only responsibility that you had from the moment you woke up till the moment you went to sleep was to heal yourself, and you had a bottomless toolbox with all of the material and spiritual resources to guide you in that endeavor. What would be in your healing toolbox? And for a population for whom the one experience of childhood sexual violence is often the first experience of violence that continues into adulthood because of the violence of the state and the violence of white supremacy, I want to offer one brief excerpt to give you a sense of the brilliance that is in this audio archive that we use as the core of our organizing model. And so this excerpt is from one of our core members named Elliot Fukui. He is a transgender man who is a mixed race, white and Japanese American. And here was his answer to what would be in his healing toolbox. I mean, like in an ideal anarchist world where there would be no state, but I do think we also need to reconcile the fact that the nonprofit industrial complex came out of a disinvestment of the government in social networks and in social safety nets. So there's that. So yes, in an ideal world where we had a government that took care of its people, it would come from the government, right? If we are in our world, the reality is that it's going to come from community, because we always have to take care of ourselves and each other because the government's not going to do it. And, you know, systems aren't going to do that. And I think a lot about things rich people have that I'm like, what would it be like to wake up every day and go swimming in an infinity pool and get in a hot tub and read and get a massage and then, you know, write and then, you know, make music with my friends in a really awesome studio where, you know, we have all the equipment we need to make music together and all the instruments that we could ever want. And what would it look like to have art supplies that you actually want and are nice and aren't like falling apart or secondhand, and to know that you had all the time you wanted with those projects? And I think it's like, it's space to breathe, honestly. It's space to breathe that so many of us don't ever get. Like, what the fuck is a vacation, you know? Like, who actually does that anymore, you know? Like, I went to Harry Potter World. It fucking changed my life, you know? It's like, this is like, it was the first time I ever went on vacation. This grown-ass man at Harry Potter World living the dream, right? Like that kind of stuff makes a difference, right? It's having space for joy, right? When you're constantly at war, right? We're at war. It's fucking exhausting. It's really hard to stay grounded in like what you actually love anymore, right? And so for me, it's like, yeah, I'm going to Harry Potter World and I want to have enough money to take everyone I love to Harry Potter World so we can all go together. And I want Harry Potter World to actually be wheelchair accessible. And I want for all the places that I love to actually be accessible, you know? I want to go to shows and I want to see my friends' art, and I want my friends to have the time and the space to make art and to dance and to make music and to express themselves. And it's healing for me too. Like, I play the ukulele. If I could just play the ukulele for 2 hours every day and not have to worry, you know, like this timeline, this deadline, these projects due, these things, I really want the whole world to take 2 weeks off. Like the whole world, like be ceasefire. Nobody's allowed to punch anybody else or do anything stupid. There's no violence, because just a 2-week fucking respite where everyone can just like, I don't care what you do. You can smoke a J, you can fucking lay out on a beach, you can play music, you can do whatever you want. But for 2 weeks, it's just no violence in a bucket. And then we can reapproach each other after that. I think that's actually what we need, a reset. So that's in my bucket. I want a reset button for healing for everybody, and tacos. I love it. So that's a little bit of a taste of what's in our audio archive and how we think about healing in a world in which the state is constantly aimed at us as an aggressor of violence. And I'm really grateful to be here today, and I'm excited to hear everyone else's presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I think we will have Dr. Niumeitolu go next, if that's all right. And Dr. Fukushima, I believe, oh no, you're doing your own PowerPoint now, right? Okay, we're good.
Oh, okay, thank you so much. Wow, Amita, thank you so much. Really honored to go after you, and thank you so much for that beautiful and important healing work that you're doing with our youth. Thank you so much. Our relatives, it's really a great honor to be here. I hope it's okay with everybody. I actually just wrote some of my, I just wrote stuff just because I thought it might be easier for me to read them, because, you know, often I get a little emotional and I just didn't want to forget things. So I'm just gonna, so I hope that that's okay with you guys, because really I do love to always look into the camera and to see all of you. So I just wanted to say Malo Lava, or good afternoon, relatives. I want to express my gratitude to my sister and actually Professor Annie Fukushima and her team for the invitation. I'm a Tongan woman. Tonga is part of the region of the world that our beloved ancestor and scholar Epeli Hau'ofa termed as Oceania, right? Or the bodies of land and water that is now known as the Pacific. Although I'm an indigenous woman from Oceania, or the Pacific, or Moana Nui, right? So I go through those terms throughout the presentation. Although I'm an indigenous woman, I actually am a guest, right? I'm a guest on this land, on this occupied Lishan Ohlone land. A guest as the Lishan Ohlone leader, Corina Gold terms, guest, meaning also Amita in conversation with you as well, right? What are our obligations? What are our responsibilities to this living land, to this living ancestor, this land, this Mother Earth, wherever we're at in Turtle Island? The land is occupied territory. What are our responsibilities to that land? And those are some of also the themes that I would like to talk about briefly, everybody, in my presentation. Before I go on, relatives, I just really want to enthusiastically congratulate Professor Annie Fukushima on her new position as full professor at the University of Utah. I wanted to acknowledge a va, or shared relationality between Annie and I, that traces our genealogy to a body of land named Huichin, the Ohlone or indigenous people's name for the East Bay, California. The East Bay includes the city of Berkeley. Annie and I met as graduate students at UC Berkeley, and the truth is, Annie saved my life. More than once. Instead of following the footsteps of competition and valuing scarcity set by the institutions of white supremacy and heteropatriarchy in academia, Annie taught us, and she especially taught me, through courageous examples, the feminist core values of compassion, sharing, and interdependency. I wanted to sincerely thank Annie for never losing faith in me and helping me to the end, to the end, Annie. After 13 years, relatives, it took me to write my dissertation on violence against women in Tongan and Pacific Islander families. I want to say thank you so much, Annie, for never giving up hope and you never stopped believing in me. And thank you so much for helping me to finally graduate. And so Annie, you're a gift to me and you're a gift to our world. So relatives, I was just here actually last week on a Zoom call at the University of Utah. I was very, very honored to be part of a Pacific Island Studies panel that was created by some wonderful folks, Pacific Islander leaders at the University of Utah. Because the University of Utah and Utah actually hosts the largest Tongan and Pacific Islander Oceanian communities here in Turtle Island of the US, outside of Hawaii. So I also had the great, just really a great blessing actually for me to talk about race, gender, and sexualities on that panel. And it's really great also to be here again with you relatives to talk about these important issues. You know, when I was thinking about this particular presentation, one of the things, relatives, that I wanted to put on I didn't want to talk about because of its great difficulties, is that Utah is a home for me. That's why I did a talk. So I perhaps wouldn't talk about Utah being a home. And so my family, we migrated from Tonga through the Mormon Church. Our migration was navigated through the Mormon Church. We built a home in Hawaii. My parents went to Brigham Young University there. And then we moved to Utah. I actually went to Brigham Young University. And the University of Utah is of a great importance to me because after 4 years at Brigham Young University, I was asked to leave. And so the University of Utah, the work of feminist scholars, like our professor Annie Fukushima, our dear sister, it was a work that saved me. And so I also want to thank the Department of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Utah. Thank you so much. Thank you for your great love for me. Thank you for introducing me to works by women of color, feminists like Gloria Anzaldúa, Cherie Moraga. That work saved my life. And so really, it's just with a great gratitude that I'm here to be in Talanoa, or meaning that I'm in a conversation space with all of you. And so I just wanted to briefly also share my screen. There we go. So this is the talk for today, and I'm going to do my very, very best to be very brief. Tongan feminisms, rematriation, and protecting the sacred as decolonial methodologies. I begin off with this particular image. In this presentation, I show images depicting 3 historical moments that delineate the productions of Tongan gender and sexualities. I argue that the Tongan productions of gender and sexualities follow the genealogies of white terror, of racialized and gendered violence deployed by European settlers, missionaries, and militaries that aim to produce colonial systems of family, gender, and sexualities against the bodies of Tongan women and girls. Correspondingly, the scope of white terror is inextricably connected to the expropriation of the Tongan natural world, the whanua, meaning our Mother Earth, land. Also, it means our bodies, right? And that is interconnected to the Moana, or the ocean, spatialities and Tongan cosmologies that are delineated as the feminine and located at the core of what we define as a sacred. I share images from my research and my community work. Okay, I know our time, so I'm gonna go through the talk here. I'm just gonna go to this first image. Okay, this first image. No, excuse me. I'm gonna start with Hu Chin, Oakland, right? This new home, my new home, and also one of the largest Tongan and Pacific Islander communities next to Salt Lake City. This particular image is here in Hu Chin, what is also now known as Oakland. And let me just read this particular historical moment. These images from the LA Times was taken in 2008 in front of the Mormon Temple in Oakland, California, during the Proposition 8 wars in California. For those of you who might know, if I could just give a little bit more information, Proposition 8 was a California ballot proposition and a state constitutional amendment intended to ban same-sex marriage and to institutionalize marriage as an institution that could only be between a man and a woman. Prop 8 passed in November 2008 in California state elections and was later overturned in court. The proposition was produced and financially supported by opponents of women's rights and LGBT rights, such as the Mormon Church, one of the world's most wealthiest, powerful religious institutions, and also one of the largest institution that comes into power and prominence in the Pacific, especially in Tonga after the US occupation of Tonga during World War II, right? That you see neoliberal institutions like Mormonism really just flourish. What's also important to note, though, is that Tongans we have the highest conversion rate into the Mormon Church in the 20th and 21st century. In fact, we hold the global record of the most baptisms and conversions. And what's also, and correspondingly, what's important to note about that is that the Mormon Church navigates our migrations to the United States, and also, right, also the formation of Tongan communities. Right? It really legislates the boundaries and the political boundaries of Tongan communities here in the United States. Okay, so this first image, I write about this first image. I write, the mainstream media's imagery of Tonganness was enticing. The big brown bodies of our Tongan men were militarized and used as weapons to police Mormon temples from Oakland, San Diego, Fresno, reaching all the way to LA. Tongan male bodies were deployed as borders to draw lines of separation from the crowds of gay rights activists and ordinary community members that refused the hate. The images of Tonganness were depicted matter-of-factly as if they were true, as if Tonganness is a spatiality devoid of gay, queer, and the feminine. The mainstream media fed us endless images, but one in particular still haunts me. The image portrayed in the LA Times depicts volatile Tongan male rage vying on a national stage against a small Jewish lesbian woman. This image still breaks my heart. What was not shown was the bodies of Tongan women that held the knowledges that recognized that Leti or two-spirit or gender non-binary or queer are at the forefront, holding, Puke Whanua, holding our land, holding our people and our communities together. What was not shown was the many bodies of Tongan queer and Leti and the bodies of Tongan men that refused the colonial institution of heteropatriarchy. In addition, relatives, what was not shown in these images was the faces of the wealthy white male Mormon church leaders issuing the orders that specifically targeted Tongan and Pacific Islander communities, calling them to the front lines while they sat safely behind their privileged desks in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I just want to draw a genealogy. I go to this particular image that was created in that shows a historical moment and a definitive and a paradigmatic moment narrative, nationalistic narrative in Tonga, right? This is King Taufa'ahau Tupou I in an important moment that actually shows his conversion into Christianity. And this moment was used as this definitive moment to define that, that normalizes violence against women. I actually shared this particular narrative from a book called Church and State in Tonga, an important book in Tongan histories, created by the important scholar, Sionilatu Kefu. And here's just a short version of what he writes about this moment. Taufa'ahau wanted to test the validity. This is our beloved king, and I really want to say this respectfully. Taufa'ahau wanted to test the validity and power of the old gods, and to discover by experience whether Jehovah was the only true God. On their arrival at the house of the god of the priestess, this is as you can see this image of the sacred elder woman. Of course, this is not her image from the past, but this is an image of an elder that I just wanted her that I wanted to represent her. So what happens when Taufa'ahau arrives at this sacred land, right? He arrives at a sacred land, and on the sacred land would be what we would say today is a sacred temple. So he arrives at the sacred temple. At his arrival, they drink an important drink for us as Pacific people, right? It's a drink called kava. It's a root. It's made from the root of a plant. It's a drink in many ways that shows intimacy, interdependency. Yet I really want to talk about how this drink and also how the feminine is, how he reacts and how he treats the feminine, okay? They drink a cup of kava filled and handed by Taufa'ahau to the sacred elder. But while her face was turned upward in the act of drinking its context, or while her face was turned upwards in the process of prayer, right? A vulnerable time, a time of great sacredness, Taufa'ahau struck her a great blow on the forehead, which sent the elder woman, or what they call her as a priestess, rolling on the ground. He then gave her another blow, and raising a shout of victory, called out that the god was slain. So relatives, I also turn to the last image, right? So these are images of Pacific Islander communities, also indigenous communities here in the Bay Area. This just shows, the presentation just concludes a return to Tongan migrations and Pacific Islander. This is not just Tongans, actually. This is all throughout Oceania, right? Polynesian, Micronesian, and Melanesian. I showed the work, actually, some of our work that we do here with California Indian communities, and especially our work to protect the sacred. For me, the work to protect the sacred is always a work to end violence against women. Because what it does is it really links, first and foremost, we follow the leadership of California women elders, California women leaders. And also we work as allies and accomplices with California Indians to protect their sacred. And through that work, we use our own Pacific Islander and Tongan methodologies, like for example, what the Tongan methodology, or to be Tongan Tauhiwa, right? Which is honoring the sacred relationalities that we share. So this first image, relatives, is actually the one you see at the bottom with all the women marching. That's actually a direct response to the Mormon Church. That's a direct response to the Mormon Church and the mainstream depictions of Pacific Islanders as heteropatriarchal and also as homophobic. That's an image actually from a feminist Pacific Islander organization that I am so proud to have been part of in 2009. That's at the Dyke March in San Francisco. That is us marching, actually, saying that we absolutely refuse your depiction of our people. As what I have always said is using Epel Hauofa, the father of Pacific Island Studies, term of smallness. Okay, and then the second one, you see us, we're in ceremony there, under the leadership again of California Lishan Ohlone leader Karina Gold. We're at the West Berkeley Shama, the oldest Ohlone sacred site here in the Bay Area. We're also holding up different flags from Oceania, showing all our relatives who are protecting the sacred, like the sacred Mauna Kea in Hawaii. That, by the way, is led by women, right? By Wahine, and also by Mahu, two spirits. Also, our relationship and our love, Dauhiwa, with our relatives from West Papua is that flag right there. And also the Tinoranga Tirotanga flag with our relatives from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And several others relatives. I know we don't have the time. The last one that I end with, perhaps I'll just go back to it right here. Right, this is the work that we do. This is our young Marshallese, and also in the back, our Tongan, Samoan, Fijian, young youth, right? Youth, queer youth as well, right? Marching. We are not drowning, we're fighting for our mokopuna. Mokopuna literally means a grandchild, excuse me. For us, we also use that term in relationship to our Indigenous relatives. We are fighting for the next 7 generations. So thank you so much. I'm sure I read after my time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I will next invite Caroline. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Are you?
Wonderful.
I'll just let you know when to play the video. Okay.
Yep, that sounds great.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here today with all of you, and to be here as a part of this panel on healing communities. I'm an artist. I'm not so much an artist in the traditional sense as a painter or sculptor, but an artist that uses creativity for healing and social change. Using creativity this way, I'm able to connect personally and profoundly with people. And it's also where I find my grounding and my connection to spirit. As a survivor, I learned a long time ago that engaging in a creative process gave me a voice. I grew up on a large farm, the youngest in a family of 5 women. And I learned firsthand that women were strong and capable and very often victims of violence. For me, the place I grew up was a paradox. It was both profoundly beautiful and also filled with trauma and shame and fear. And it was the land that we lived on which provided me with a refuge and helped me to survive. My instinct was to creatively express the beauty it held for me. And it was through photographing the land that I saw my ability to act as an artist, to fully express my voice. And I was eventually able to match it with a cause that was both personal and universal. I grew to learn that my individual identity could be separate from the circumstances of my immediate situation. I became an advocate for the right of all women to be fully expressed, to say no, to be free of violence perpetrated solely on the basis of being female. So how do we personally connect with an issue like gender-based violence? It's pretty overwhelming for most people. And one answer, I believe, is through art. And more than 10 years ago, I created our signature workshop called Traveling Postcards. And the idea came from thinking about the old-fashioned sewing circle where women would gather together in creative circles to make something for someone in community that was in need. And I believe when we use our hands, we step out of our heads and sink into our hearts. And when we speak from that place of our authentic voice, and when we're asked to be of service, this is where empowerment and healing can occur. I also understood intuitively that when women gather and feel safe, that life-saving wisdom is passed between generations and between survivors. And that was my intention with Traveling Postcards. So Traveling Postcards is a therapeutic workshop that centers empathy and connection and brings survivors and their allies to the table to make a handmade piece of art the size of a postcard as a gift for a survivor of gender-based violence. Each card contains wisdom, beauty, and compassion, and is hand-delivered through our hospital bag program or via shelter or safe house. Our participants will never hear back from the person who receives their card. Instead, they're asked to speak their truth, to say whatever it is they think will help heal someone, or whatever they need to speak to help heal themselves. Everyone who receives a card is asked to make a card. We have created and distributed over 5,000 postcards in the last 10 years, and no two postcards have ever looked alike. Not one postcard spoke of anger or resentment. All contain voices of love, compassion, and empowerment. So I want to play a video now that will show you much of what goes on in our workshop. We've recently created a campaign called Speak Your Truth that allows for us to collect voices of solidarity from anywhere in the world on a new digital platform that I'll talk more about after the video. I'll let Diane play that. Do you have sound?
Can you hear that?
No, we can't. So you might have to click, there's a little carrot. Yeah, I think you know how to do this better than I do. But there's that little carrot next to the microphone. You might just have to choose your same as sound. Yeah, there we go.
The Speak Your Truth campaign is an opportunity for survivors to tell their truth, to heal, and to share their resiliency. When we ask the question, what would the world be like without gender-based violence? We are asking you to imagine a better and more just future for everyone. As the pandemic grows, so does violence against women, the so-called shadow pandemic. More and more women are trapped in their homes in unsafe situations made worse by growing poverty, illness, and stress. Gender-based violence primarily affects women. Black, Indigenous, and women of color experience a disproportionate higher rate of violence. So does the LGBTQ community. 1 in 3 women around the world will experience violence in her lifetime. We can't ignore it. And the more we speak out, the more we realize that violence perpetrated solely because we identify as female, it's not normal, but it sure is pervasive. But how do you personally connect to an issue like gender-based violence that can seem so overwhelming? It has been far too easy to stay separated by blaming and shaming victims. How do we begin to see the resiliency of women, not just the victimization?
You really have a chance to touch someone else in a way that's not so physical. It's that you know that you are putting yourself into this small, only a few inches of white paper, but it turns into this piece that is you and completely your own, and there's no wrong way to do it, and you can put as much or as little as you want on it, and at the end of the day, you know it's going to someone that is going to cherish it and draw strength from it, and in a way that strengthens you to know that you are making a difference in someone else's life, and that female to female or survivor to survivor or human to human, we can touch each other in ways that are sacred and safe and positive.
How do we begin to see the resiliency of a woman who has simply survived?
Well, I made this card to reflect that after we go through things, we begin again. So I use the phrase begin again on the message of my card to let people know that it's okay to start over. That when you're down, when you are broken, when you are exhausted, rest and then begin again.
What we have learned is that engaging in a creative process engages you in a personal expression, and that personal expression is what most deeply resonates.
So I included the sun setting in the corner. I have different shades of blue because I know that blue and teal is sexual assault, the color that represents sexual assault. And I didn't fix my heart or can explain my crooked heart because it shows that we are all imperfect, but it's suitable to us. So someone may get this card and not even see that or think that it's crooked because it's suitable to them.
Art is healing, and you don't need to be an artist to benefit from creativity. Art has another language in which to process trauma, and through that creative process, we can begin to feel again. When we say speak your truth, well, all we mean is speak from your heart. Speak from your heart. Share with another survivor. Share your resilience. Share your wisdom.
Just has a huge impact on the deep emptiness of why does this even happen, to know that other people are in the same healing process.
How can you help someone else heal? What do you need to say that can help you heal? We have found that when we ask survivors and their allies to share their resiliency in the face of violence, we all benefit. There's nothing more powerful than speaking our truth. We invite all those who may or may not self-identify as survivors, or who are a part of a marginalized community that understands what it simply means to survive, to join us in creating a world without gender-based violence. We want everybody to know, every survivor to know, that they are never alone. We're super excited about the Speak Your Truth campaign, and we hope that you'll join us.
Thanks. So as a survivor, the best way I was able to use my voice to help others heal without being triggered was through art. And it was really important that I found that mechanism. And I think it's really important to create opportunities for survivors to speak their truth and share their resilience in a safe and nurturing way. And when the pandemic hit and I could no longer travel to lead workshops, I thought there might be a way to gather voices online instead. So we have now created a living piece of art that I call, and one that grows with every new voice that's added. And through a unique photo mosaic platform, anyone can answer one of our questions, which is, what would the world look like without gender-based violence? It's a simple question. Or what is your story of solidarity or resilience? And for those who don't know what a photo mosaic is, it usually has one large image that's actually made up of thousands of smaller images. And it sort of underscores that a single voice contributes to the whole. So we have created that large single beautiful image that fills in like a coloring book, with each pixel containing a creative response and a unique voice. And I just invite you to come to our website and participate in the mosaic. You can, anybody from anywhere in the world can upload a story, a visual, a poem, a dance. And our hope is just to be able to collect all these voices and have them archived, and hopefully they are used to inspire healing and hope. And I also just want to say you're welcomed anytime to participate in a traveling postcards workshop. We're having one next week in this community, and we're offering workshops both online and in person when we can safely gather. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. We will wrap up with Saundra.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm grateful to be here and to share with you, and to follow my friend and colleague Caroline. And I can tie in with Caroline because working as a chaplain at the University Hospital, am one of the people who get to impart those postcards and the hospital bags to survivors. So I'm a multi-faith chaplain, and I'm at the university, but I've also spent, prior to that, 6 years at the YWCA part-time, and I work with the survivors who lived there and recovered there. And we did weekly art workshops. The more I understood how much that integrated into healing the spirit, working with creativity. But I want to begin by acknowledging the woundedness that is around religion, as our friend shared even earlier in this hour. So part of what I encounter as I spend time with patients, and many of whom have trauma that's just filled in our hospital, is this religious wounding. And I always think that when we look at the power and control wheel that we see as for domestic violence or intimate partner violence, the hub of that is power and control. And there's all those spokes that come out of areas where people experience abuse. And what's missing on there is religion and spirituality, because that is an important area where patriarchy and power and control, especially when we're invoking, you know, the authority of the divine or the sacred or God, or on top of it, is an extreme affront to our humanity. And so my role is to compassionately companion people in suffering. It is to come alongside a person in their pain and to support and accompany their own interior exploration. I do not bring anything like expertise or wisdom, or I don't proselytize, but I come alongside. And if I'm doing well, I support that interior exploration and help people to evoke their own wisdom and to speak their own truth and to move toward healing. And often that is accomplished through listening. So my skill set is really that of being a precision listener and making space, to create space, which is always an invitation for people to step into and tell me their story. But I kind of have to expand the understanding of what spirituality is, right? That religion is one component. Religion is a symbolic language, much like art. And it has much beauty, and it has done much wounding. So when we're stepping into healing, we want to expand past those narrow conceptions of what it means to be human, what it means to experience love, what it means to have a spiritual life. And that for me goes toward connection. So first of all, finding a connection to ourselves, which we might call soul. We can think about that as our essential self, who we are in our essence, our dignity, our intrinsic value. So we want to connect there. Spirituality is also connection outward, horizontally, to each other. So to every sentient being and the ways that we find meaning there. And then often it is a connection to something of transcendence. Unless we are, dedicated materialists that think this wooden table in front of us is all there is, we are often looking for what do we connect to that moves our spirit, that takes us to places of awe or places of wonder. Spiritual care is very much invested in meaning making. So again, coming alongside of people, not bringing my message, but hearing your message, and in getting involved in a process of saying, well, this has happened in your life. This is your experience. This is what you know. This is what you've read. What do we make of that? What is the meaning in that? And moving, witnessing, wounding, listening to those stories of what has happened in wounding, and evoking wisdom and approaching the questions that are existential. Who am I? What is my purpose? Why am I here? So all of that is part of what I do in spiritual care. And specifically, I would like to speak to how it applies to the hospital and to survivors and those who've experienced trauma. So hospital and hospitality have the same root word. They both mean to welcome the stranger. And that's how I approach spirituality, by the way, is, we all have a place we live. I have my home. You have yours. I certainly don't think this is the only place to live. My address, there are many addresses around the world. You are welcome to visit me here. I would be honored to visit you in your spiritual home. And in this way, we can extend hospitality to each other and, learn and grow and share and have a feast. So that's how I approach in entering into someone else's space and accompanying them. Caroline's program with traveling postcards, and I pulled out mine from the first workshop I was part of, because I got to have one too, was brought to the university in 2019. And we had a small grant, and we gathered over 50 employees. So these are the nurses, everybody in the hospital, all the people who are working there. And we did 3 different workshops with 50 people total, coming together and creating those postcards, learning about gender-based violence and doing their own work and their own healing, connecting to each other as caregivers, but also knowing that each of these cards was going to go back into our community and into the world. Part of the traveling postcards is also the bag. She mentioned the hospital bag, and the intent of that bag, we use that at the university for survivors of sexual assault. And I use that when I meet patients. So somebody comes in through our ED, thankfully we use SANE nurses at the university, and they are cared for in our emergency department. Our nurses or myself or a social worker knows that they can give a hospital bag. There's a beautiful bag that the person can touch and feel. And inside of that bag is the art that somebody has created with that message for them. Recently, I just I give these bags out to patients when I encounter and listening to people that they've had trauma. This is a way for me to build a bridge and connect and share with them and hear from them. And if we were to speak theologically, I would say it's sacramental, because it's a tangible object that has meaning that we can't see. We can also just say it makes a sensory connection. And when I impart this to people, I would say, this comes from a community of people who care about you. We want you to know every time you see this bag, and when you leave here, you put your belongings not in that cheap plastic bag the hospital gives you, but yours go in here, because, we just want you to have this with you. Remember, wherever you go, there's many of us who care about you and your healing. And I give her the card and impart the value of that art, and that this card is meant to share your beauty, to remind you of your beauty as you go through your own healing process. Diane, if you put up the detangling story image, one or both of them, I'd like to just conclude by sharing a couple of stories about how this works, that plays out with patients when I'm caring for them one-on-one. If you'll flip to the next image, Diane, you'll see words. So here, what I start with is a black and white photo, and then I asked someone to write a story, a creative story around the edges of that photo. And that's just imaginative about what that person's life might be like. However, they are seeing it coming from themselves. It also entails a lot of who they are inside of that story. And then eventually I asked them to cut away that story. So this is what you see here. She cut the image away from the person, and we detangle that story from the image. And that for us is just a tangible way of looking at that and saying, well, are you your story, or are you something other than your story? Is that part of who you are? It's not a didactic. I don't provide the answers, but we ask the questions. And then if you flip back, Diane, to the other one, I would invite them to say, well, what does your soul look like? And this was her imagination of what her soul might look like. And so sitting with this patient over several days' time, I was able to listen to her story, to invite her to tell me, not in a way that's traumatizing, but according to her own agenda, what happened to her. And never before in her life had she been given an hour and a half of time to tell what she said was from beginning to end her story. So in listening to her, in involving her in creating and letting her express in these tangible ways, that's one example of how I try to work one-on-one with survivors, and particularly the women who are in our hospital. And I think I have another example, but I think I'm at time, correct?
No, you actually have about 3 minutes. Do you want me to share the other piece that you sent?
I'll put the next image up there. I'll show you this. This is another process that I like to use. So, you know, it can be very difficult to be speaking face-to-face with someone. And so using art is a way to create a third thing. So instead of looking directly at each other, we're looking at this piece. So the prompt to this was to tell me what emotion was inside of you that was your largest emotion just today. What is the big emotion that's running inside of you? And for this woman, it was fear. So I said, great, here are some oil pastels. Show me what the fear monster looks like. Bring it out of your body, put it on the page. Sometimes people create things that are more literally looking like monsters, and a lot of times people do things like this that are very abstract. So after she's created, then we can come back around and talk about what she's made. So this is never me interpreting for someone. This is always my asking questions and hearing her expression of what she's feeling. And as we go through this process together, the experience deepens, and the images and the nonverbal expression allow an access to the interior that can come forward and be expressed with words in a way that then I can engage in dialogue, and we can hear the story, we can see the feelings, and we can move toward healing collaboratively together. Thank you.
And so I just want to thank you all for sticking with us today, hanging out, learning, being present as best as you can, and really thinking and imagining things that I feel like our colleagues and friends have given us so many gifts of so many ideas and practices that they are already doing. There's so many models out there. And so I just want to appreciate you all in this anti-oppressive journey that we're all embarking on together, and that we are all together witnessing on the side of the oppressed. And so I so appreciate all of you for joining us, and you will hear from us by email, and you're always welcome to join us when you can, if it makes sense for your world. And if it doesn't, we welcome any future collaborations with all of you. And with that, I just want to appreciate all of you for joining us, and hope you have lovely dinners if it's dinner time. And if it is past dinner time, I hope you sleep well, and that you all take care of yourself, so we can all do this for the long haul. There's so much work to be done together. So thank you everyone for joining. Bye.